Good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Brent. I'm the editor-in-chief of Briefing magazine, Smarter Legal Business Management, as I hope you all know. And welcome to this in our series of webcasts, Closer to Clients. I'm joined this morning by Gareth Thomas, who is practice group leader for the marketing and BD practice EMEA at Intapp, who is co-hosting with us. He was previously in senior leadership roles at One Place, which is now part of Intapp. And also I manage Raven and Ticket. Good morning to you, Gareth.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Very well. Excited for the conversation. So this morning's webcast is on a topic that we've covered quite a few times in Briefing over the years, getting closer to your clients, how you collaborate with them. It's great to see so many of you have joined us with an interest in this subject. And I suspect that it is one that resonates particularly deeply at the moment as a challenge, considering that we're all taking part in this from such a distance. How do you keep those key pillars of client service, engagement, and true understanding going through a time like this? That's what we're going to be trying to unpack. Is it a time to look at transformation of process or not? I hope we can provide some useful perspectives through our conversation, and also maybe some takeaway lessons for you as well. And a couple of small points before we get into the meat of the conversation. It is being recorded this morning, and also during the conversation you can ask me to ask our speakers any questions on your behalf. There is a sort of an ask a question button just at the bottom of the screen here. Hopefully it's very clear to you. And if you just type in your question there, I'll be keeping half an eye and an ear on that, so that I can ask them as and when they pop up. So please do feel free to join in. Although we're all listening in, although you're all listening in to us, it would be nice that you could feel that you could join in the conversation this morning. So before we speak to our GC, Gareth, what's your starter for 10 on this topic from Intapp's perspective?
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Richard. So I think probably the biggest thing that we've seen from an Intapp perspective around law firms' abilities to get close to their clients is really one of data, the quality of the data and how well that data is connected. So firms that are able to serve their lawyers with the information they're looking for in the context of why they're looking for it at the right time, as opposed to lawyers having to go to 4, 5, 6 different silo data sources, both internally and externally, really gives the firms that are able to give their lawyers access to this information quickly and in a timely fashion a massive head start, I believe.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gareth. All right. So now I'm going to welcome to the screen Natalie Salunka. Gareth, we're going to say goodbye to you, but we're going to bring you on a bit later. And hello, Natalie.
Hey, Richard. Can you hear me okay?
Indeed, thank you.
Good.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. And Natalie was most recently the head of legal and a member of the UK and European management teams at Fleet Corp, which provide payment products and services to commercial fleets, major oil companies, and petroleum companies. Before that, she was for several years the European General Counsel at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and also senior corporate counsel at the cloud software provider NetSuite, which is now part of Oracle. She first became a head of legal of Vendor, which was later acquired by NetSuite at 27, she tells me, and training at Taylor Wessing. She's passionate about a mutual understanding between legal teams and the law firms that they work with. And as part of that, she's a contributor to the O-Shape initiative, which launched recently and which we will talk a little more about in the course of the conversation. So Natalie, before we talk about law firms themselves, can you tell us a little bit about what you got up to in your 2 or 3 years at Fleet Corp? What were your main responsibilities, the big challenges for you in the role?
Sure. So it was a very diverse role. I was running the geographies across the UK, Europe, Russia, and ANZ. And I was the first lawyer that actually hired internally to cover a geographical area that wasn't the general counsel in the US. So it was quite new to the local business guys. And so I think they got quite used to a certain type of delivery of service, which is probably quite external to the overall sort of businesses that were being supported, relatively sort of siloed legal advice. And I think, you know, they were used to fast delivery of legal advice, which was great. So they were getting that from their service providers, but it wasn't always particularly accurate, and it wasn't necessarily sort of well priced for the type of initiatives it was. So they didn't really have that person sort of keeping that in check for them. So as I alluded to, I was managing a team across multiple jurisdictions. So that comes with its sort of, you know, cultural as well as time zone sort of challenges as well. And I guess the main objective that I was sort of tasked with was sort of driving efficiency, but whilst also being careful with legal spend, setting up processes, as I think we mentioned at the start of this call, and making sure people knew who to come to for what as well.
Okay, yeah. And tell us a bit about how you found law firms that understood those needs. Were they on the same page as you, or what was your experience there?
You know, and this is definitely not going to be a law firm bashing session, because I'm very, very anti those, because, you know, it doesn't get anybody anywhere. But I think, in all honesty, it's very patchy. I'm sure law firms would say that of their general counsels that they work with and heads of legals and lawyers. That relationship isn't always well balanced. And I think, you know, if I'm being honest, in some of my roles, existing firms haven't always been, cutting the mustard, in that they don't really seem to understand the objectives of the company or of the team. And I think where you don't have that strong relationship manager, or at least a few of the people in that kind of firm that really are trying to get that understanding of your business and what you're after, you know, it can be almost seen as quite arrogant and a little bit frustrating. So one of the things I'm always keen to do is make sure we're clear about our objectives to the firms that we work with, because there's no point in judging if you haven't played your part in that process, right. So that we could align them with those of the law firms. So, you know, I think where you've got a large law firm that's working on kind of little sort of squibs and squabs here and there, is that really the right profile of work that firm should be working on? Is it sort of scalable? Is it well priced? Is it good value? Or actually, is there something that could be better aligned between our relationship with that firm? So I think having those really honest conversations really helps. I haven't really tended to work with panels. I'm much more about sort of individuals in firms and, you know, their expertise. And yeah, I do have some firms that I like working with, but I haven't ever sort of felt the need to formalize a panel. So, you know, I think you can get your stable of law firms, if we call them that, to a kind of good place. But I don't think it means you can just, once you've got your stable, you shouldn't sort of leave that relationship, you know, be. I think it's something you've got to work on, like any relationship. Okay.
And when you were having those conversations, you're saying those are open and honest conversations about what law firms should be doing for you or not. How did you find they sort of took that openness and honesty back then?
I mean, I think there's sometimes a lot of nodding of heads, but sort of not a lot of sort of action post those conversations I've seen. I think it's probably still seen as quite a refreshing approach, but a lot of the kind of, you know, top GCs in the country, we do take this type of approach to these type of conversations. We do take these conversations head on, but I think, you know, a lot of law firms aren't used to that sort of openness of communication, and also that kind of openness that isn't trying to point fault. I think that's key to these kind of discussions. It's you're not trying to berate somebody, you know, through the conversation. It's actually, we're trying to make sure the relationship works for both parties. Now, you're going to have certain price points that make sense to you. For me, there are going to be certain things that I can't have go over budget, and I have to have timely and certain quality of advice. So how do we marry those together? So I think, you know, as I said, it's been a variety of different responses. I think the firms that have tended to kind of continue the relationship are the ones that get it, or get me and what we're trying to achieve, at least.
Mm-hmm. And you're quite right, this isn't going to be in any sense a law firm bashing session. Before we leave this sort of topic, was there any one particular thing that you did wish that they had sort of done differently during that time, or that they just didn't get?
I think it's disappointing, obviously, when a firm doesn't try to win your business, if they're already on your panel. I think the ones that assume, I think, can come across as quite arrogant, as I sort of mentioned before. I think, you know, firms that listen to what the client is telling them rather than assuming, I think, is really key. You know, I think law firms are full of very smart individuals, but it doesn't mean you always are right. And I think that key to listening are the ones that, you know, the ones that don't do that are the ones that kind of come unstuck because we're not aligned and we don't have those clear communication channels where we understand where each other's coming from.
Yes, okay. Briefing writes and talk a lot about technology, and not just about it in terms of communicating with clients, of course, although that's quite a topical subject at the moment. And I know that your businesses have been very focused on technology as well. Are there any ways in which you've been particularly impressed by law firms when it comes to their approaches to technology and client collaboration or delivery, service delivery?
Yes, so it's funny, I was sort of reflecting on this sort of recently, and I remember BCLP back when they were BLP. And this would have been when I worked at Travelex. It would have been about sort of 2007, 8. They were one of the first law firms that actually were kind of giving clients client portals where they could host their documents, their know-how, share knowledge. It's really kind of groundbreaking, and I think they're still continuing to do some really kind of cool stuff in that space. So I think there's early adopters. The fact that they kind of continue to try and continually innovate, I think is really cool. But there are lots of law firms that are offering loads of stuff at the moment, and I think firms who genuinely offer tech to take the pain away.
Yes.
With regards to billing and any IT integration scoping work, will do well, because what you don't always appreciate when looking from the outside into companies is that budget can be a real issue for in-house teams, but it's not just budget as well as the delivery roadmap. So the IT resourcing that you've got internally, if there are any integrations that are required, trying to get that time for a non-revenue generating function can actually be really, really difficult. And equally, if you have CapEx versus OpEx budgets, if you can manage to get these type of sort of technologies billed for in a way that they're actually just going out of your law firm fees and the usual kind of billing that you'd expect to see, then you're able to kind of absorb that into your budget into different ways that perhaps it wouldn't always be you might not always be able to if you had to go direct. I also think that firms that proactively reach out and read something in the press and check in, show that they're thinking of you. And I think that's a real kind of key thing that I think some firms just don't sort of aren't on top of.
Do you think that's because it's not sort of institutionalized, that sort of practice, that sort of process, or is it left to pockets to set their own behaviors? Do you have a sense of that?
I think it's because law firms generate lawyers and not salespeople. I think if you looked at any other company type setup, you would have salespeople that sell the product, that know how to get those conversations over the line and really know how to listen to the problem and try and come up with a solution. You have account managers who then take that relationship forward and continue to manage it. So they're not selling, they're doing a different sort of selling, and they're actually making sure the relationship's working. I think we expect that lawyers who've been trained to be lawyers, who then find themselves becoming a partner or a relationship manager in a law firm, having to have just acquired those skills, even though actually their core skill is to provide legal advice. I think there's probably a bit of a gap there, that if we actually took a law firm and looked at it and applied company type principles to it, you probably see a lot of areas where you could really sort of change the way that you're behaving to actually service the client better, because companies work with that model. And and law firms, some law firms are actually starting to adopt that model and are getting quite good results.
Yeah. Of course, law firms have been over the last sort of 5 years hiring experts in other sort of skill areas to help to improve client service. So sort of legal operations professionals of their own, project managers, process improvement people, things like that, and obviously most recently heads of innovation and innovation teams, which can often be seen as quite technology, although I'm often told it's not just about technology. I was just wondering, I'm quite interested in where all of that will now go post lockdown into the new normal, whatever it might be. Have you seen any particularly good results come out of those sort of relationships and those structures that firms have put in place, fostering innovation and fostering legal operations bridges between client and law firm?
I can't say I've got personal experience of that in the roles that I've done, but I'm definitely aware of these type of practice areas and these new kind of ways of working, and was aware of these type of roles before law firms kind of adopted them. And I think if you look at sort of other industries, it feels as though law firms may have been a little bit late to the party in this area. And, whether or not there's the substance to back up those functions, I think is going to be key. I think there was a bit of a buzz drive in getting these people on board, but it's sort of, well, now that you've got them, what are you actually doing with them? And are you actually empowering them to be able to do what you need them to do? So, we've always been operationally focused in my teams anyway. That's just the way that we kind of, think. And, we're listening to the business and listening to the lawyers and the team and trying to marry those objectives together. Streamlining processes, I think, is a really important piece that law firms, may be able to help with. I think what I've learned from speaking to, a number of different people in the industry is that, actually some GCs, heads of legal, some teams naturally have that kind of innovative or operational mindset. But a lot of teams out there are still sort of struggling and sort of see their role as lawyers within a business and are still talking about being business partners. But when it comes to sort of the other side of, adapting and streamlining, they're not always in the forefront. And I think that's where these sort of external firms can really come in and sort of help. But yet again, it has to not come with that air of arrogance, because, if you've set up this kind of big sort of operational function within your law firm that's talking about how you can outsource all your, contracts in a certain area to them, it's not always going to work from a scalability perspective for a small company. So tailoring those conversations, the type of clients you're speaking to, and recognizing, the different profile of your client and where you may be able to add that value in a more intelligent fashion than just going, hey, we've got this massive innovation center, is actually going to resonate, more with people. So I think that's really important to think about.
That's interesting. Along the lines of that point, we've had our first question from somebody listening in, from Simon Moffat. He asks you, have you worked with non-lawyer relationship managers specifically? And do you have a view on non-lawyer relationship managers compared to, say, lawyer relationship contacts? Do you find that they approach things differently?
I think they do, because they feel more comfortable with what their role is, because I think it's more clearly defined, and they will have come from potentially a multitude of different backgrounds and not just a legal background to become that sort of relationship manager. So I think you don't have that kind of existentialist crisis that some lawyers feel when they're sort of, am I a salesperson? Am I a relationship manager? Am I a lawyer? How can I be both? And, I think some people, there are some partners, there are some people out there that aren't necessarily lawyers, and there are definitely people who are lawyers as well that are quite good at it, because, they're kind of relatively well-rounded and have been able to kind of have that safety net, or they've kind of been bullish enough to just behave in that manner anyway, and that's benefited their firm. So I think I don't mind, as long as ultimately, as I kind of alluded to earlier, that firm is really trying to understand my problem and create a solution for me, that they are listening to my problem. And if I can see that coming through, I work with some amazing lawyers that actually just do get it, and are able to do that. And, they're not even partners yet. And, I think it's more about the substance of the skill set than the title that you give it.
Mm-hmm. It's somebody on the technology point in particular, offering clients technology solutions to their problems. And somebody in an issue of briefing earlier this year, before lockdown, referred to the shiny object syndrome, which I thought was quite a neat way of putting it. Sort of obsession with the latest bit of kit, perhaps, but is it actually the answer that you need in your case, on the client side? Do you wish that those particular or do you feel that those particular technology conversations, you would like them to happen in slightly different ways, whether that's bringing different people into the conversation or not?
I think so, and it's funny because I've talked about this, on a number of different panels, and I think it's interesting. It really depends on the lawyer or the person that you're engaging with on the client side, and as to what their objectives are. So for me, for example, coming from having worked at many technology companies, I obviously have a natural interest in tech. So for me, I do want to understand how it works, rather than just what it actually does. I do want to understand how, where its vulnerabilities could be, etc. But I think some people don't want to be sold like that. So, I'd be more than happy to have somebody who's technical in the room as well as the lawyer, triaging that sort of sale of that particular technology product, because it would allow me to ensure I get the right responses. Maybe the lawyer would know those things as well, I don't know. But I've heard some people are more solution driven and say, we actually don't care how you get from A to B, we just want to know that that it works and it achieves my objective. So I think, yet again, I kind of keep sort of whittling it down to this, I think it's not taking a homogenous approach to the sale of these type of products or services, and actually really trying to understand your client to get the best reaction out of them. And that sometimes is an individual thing, it's sometimes a cultural thing, and it's sometimes an institution thing. And you know, and unfortunately it is really that sort of, you know, delicate, but it's also not a rocket science as well. It doesn't take a lot to ask pertinent questions, and if you have a genuine interest in what you're doing, you should be able to have that sort of dialogue to get you where you need to get to.
What about then these times that we find ourselves in now? How law firms should be reaching out to clients now? And I suppose they're, to an extent, their own people. I mean, it's communication and collaboration is really sort of under pressure now, isn't it? And you led a very dispersed team, I think, at Speak for individuals in just one or two individuals in different countries. Have you got any sort of perspective that you could share with the law firms on making a success of this sort of remote working world, new normal or otherwise? Firstly, I suppose, with their own people. Yeah,
and I think so. I mean, I think whatever people they are, whether they're in a law firm or not, I think ultimately you've got to remember that everyone is an individual, and people who may have been coping at the outset of the crisis and lockdown and may no longer be feeling the same. So I think, you know, you've got to really remember that people cope in different ways, and people who are struggling don't always manifest it openly, and vice versa. So you've really got to have those personal one-to-one conversations and make sure people feel okay. You know, I think, but you also need to be careful not to be sort of too intrusive, and I mean that in the sense of, you know, some people are already getting Zoom fatigue. You know, I think, you know, we're all guilty of sort of being on the phone and potentially multitasking. You can't really do that on a Zoom call. You've got to kind of try and engage with that person, and you can't really kind of just go off and do other things, which I think some people kind of used to doing on certain types of calls, which have now been sort of, you know, video conferenced. And, you know, I think some people are even sort of feeling quite sort of monitored by those Zoom calls or those kind of video conferencing type environments, because, you know, I think some companies are still struggling with trust issues. I think a lot of companies never would have allowed their workforce to work remotely, may have been very averse to it, and now seeing that it actually does work, I think some people are even finding that they're even more you know, they're kind of producing better outcomes from being at home than they would in the office. They're actually kind of, you know, able to sort of concentrate more. But it is kind of, you know, different people are finding different sort of challenges. So I think one of the keys for me has been with my team is just giving people the option as to how they interact with each other. So not putting too much pressure on a certain type of style of communication that is expected. So yes, I think the variety of different ways you can communicate will get you, you know, will work for different end users and different people, and you've got to kind of bear that in mind. But I think, you know, if people don't want to be on Zoom calls all the time, and they actually do want to have a conversation, or they're happy to converse by email, I think, you know, we don't have to move everything to a virtual kind of video world necessarily. And I think, you know, that definitely should be kind of left down to individuals and as to how they cope. And I think one thing to kind of mention is that I think this goes to all companies, but definitely, you know, if we're talking about law firms, is that the changes that law firms make now will be remembered for years to come. And, you know, employees are going to be remembered for being a good employer or a bad one. And, you know, what you don't want is, you know, the more people I've spoken to, a lot of people, especially lawyers, didn't realise that they actually could do their job well from home. And actually, even without the sort of all the big tech and infrastructure and big heavy printers for 150-page documents, they're finding they actually can do it. And, you know, speaking to a couple of companies that were employing sort of consultants, you know, legal consultants and those kind of alternative business structures, they're actually saying they're getting more and more queries through from people actually going, you know what, I want to work for a model like yours where it's remote working, I'm a consultant, I can do what I need, and I want that freedom. So I think we are going to see a shift in the legal market in terms of people and where they're looking at moving. And law firms might not be the most, you know, attractive model. You know, money is one thing, but I think, you know, we're seeing more and more the lifestyle and the ability to kind of, you know, care about your mental health, have time to do exercise, have time to spend with your family is equally important. And if you're cutting out a commute, these are things that people are starting to take into account. So if you're not going to kind of take the approach of being flexible in terms of that agile working, I think you're probably going to find you're kind of, going to fall by the wayside. And just one final comment, as a tech company or somebody who works for tech cos, some of those technology companies out there have already said we're never going to ask our employees to work in an office again. And we're already seeing that in the news. So, are we going to innovate too and start to make the legal profession feel more attractive as a profession that is actually moving with the times?
How firms respond to this situation could become a new sort of competitive front differentiator for them.
Yeah, definitely.
I didn't ask you at the beginning, actually. Have you looked yourself in your roles at using sort of the less traditional law firm models that we're seeing increasingly popping up to compete with sort of traditional partnerships? Is that something that's on the radar a lot?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's some really, really cool outfits out there at the moment, and some of them have been sort of out there for about the last 10 years or so. Others more sort of recently. There's some amazing models that sort of look at like Obelisk, that look into sort of women that are returning to work and they wanted to get back into the workplace, and now they've expanded to it not just being about women, but that's where they kind of started. Hailbury that sold to Elevate. They kind of set up to do a similar sort of thing. You've got law firms and sort of law badge models that are remote law firms that, because they don't have the overheads of the bricks and mortar, are able to charge much lower hourly rates and are actually attracting a lot of that kind of partner talent from those firms who actually want that kind of work-life balance, agile balance of the way that they operate, and actually can be more competitive than they were previously priced because their hourly rate's actually less than it used to be, but they're a more experienced lawyer than they once were. So I've actually been using, one firm that does a really good kind of retainer model that allows me within that retainer to utilise any lawyer of any discipline within that firm under that same kind of umbrella agreement I've got and that same kind of hourly rate, which just has been an actual life changer. And last year, I think I could probably attribute the saving that I made not only to the way in which we operate, but partly partnering this law firm meant that I was managed to knock off about 100 grand off my UK legal budget, which really said something. So you can do some really smart stuff. And one thing that definitely comes through is that we want to work with happy lawyers. I don't like receiving emails at 11 o'clock or pieces of advice late at night because I think, well, is this like the last piece of work that you snuck in after all the other stuff you were working on and you're just trying to get it out because you said you've left it till the last minute? Or is it because you feel pressure that you've got to get it through? Why can't lawyers work in the way that makes sense for them? And I don't want lawyers to feel under pressure to do work if it's not got a tight deadline, or I want them to do it in a way that kind of works for them. And happy lawyers does come through. You can feel that when you're dealing with people who are actually genuinely enthused or happy with the situation they've got, rather than stressed lawyers. You can see it in the work.
That does take me on to another question that we've had from the listeners. I was going to ask about how you found that law firms are reaching out in this period to clients, or how you think they should be. And Irma Kesner says, have law firms been taking the initiative, to reach out to you directly, not via invitations or newsletters, for example? The usual thought leadership things.
Well, I think for me, because I've changed roles over the COVID sort of period, I think a lot of people are reaching out to me anyway because I left my previous role at FleetCor. So I already had those relationships with those firms and they're reaching out to me on a personal level anyway. So I've got that. I think, just kind of what I've seen is probably what I'm going to call COVID update overload. And I think what I've seen is a lot of firms defaulting to mass mailings rather than sort of tailoring it to their clients' needs. So a lot of generic sort of content, which I think at first was useful because it's always nice to have somebody read the legislation for you and tell you, what the key things you need to sort of bear in mind rather than reading the BBC's version of it. But then it also feels a little bit, not lazy, but it doesn't really feel personal. So I think definitely a more tailored check-in rather than a mass mail out is appreciated. I think more proactive horizon scanning. So I already alluded before, I don't think it's that difficult to set Google alerts in relation to your clients so that they're mentioned on, what they're mentioned in on a daily basis and you could spend the first hour on your train or first hour of your day with your coffee and your breakfast going through that and seeing if anything interesting's happened to your clients, and then reaching out and saying, hey, I noticed you've just launched a new product. How did that go? You know, how was the issue with, you know, bringing it into France? Did you realize that this was a problem? Or, you know, is there anything we can help you with? Because we've done that in these geographies. Are you looking at doing, you can really have some more kind of intelligent legal conversations, you know, which I think at this stage, those kind of approaches, as well as the kind of personal approaches, is just to how are you doing? How are you coping? Or, you know, I think are really, really going to kind of be better for those type of, you know, relationships. And I think, you know, you get into any relationship, you get in what you get out. And I think that is an equation. And I think a lot of firms haven't necessarily been taking the time to do that, in my experience.
And I suppose practically, just like we were saying, you know, there's a danger of too much internal communication with all the different tools that we're now using, remote working. You could also have sort of just basic email overload coming from law firms to clients as well. Another question which I was going to get into was, when choosing a law firm, this is from Simon King, when choosing a law firm to work with, how important is the diversity of the team in who is going to do your work important to you in your decision making about whether to work with that firm?
I mean, for me personally, it is really important, because I think as leaders in the profession, if we aren't trying to, as the client, push for change, if there isn't a client need for it, then generally the market doesn't change. So I think, you know, we have to take that into account. It's difficult because if you're doing a panel review, how do you really check the diversity? Do you look at the overall numbers of the firm? Okay, do you look at the particular team that's being assigned to you? That's going to vary depending on the type of work you're doing. So, I mean, for me, I do kind of make sure that I sort of check in and see, you know, if there are certain people being offered to work with me, what the rest of the team structure looks like. Because it could be, I mean, if there is just a team, for example, of white men, and you're saying, well, I want a, you know, mixed race woman, if they don't have that in their stable, do you penalise the law firm itself on a more kind of sort of macro level because they haven't really, you know, done what you know, they're not really doing anything in the sort of long run or in the bigger picture, or you're actually kind of saying on a work level, I want to see that you're giving opportunities to the right type of people within your sort of firm. I think it's quite difficult from the outside to kind of have an influence on that, but it's definitely something that's on the agenda. I think, you know, probably one of the things that we were going to probably touch on today was sort of the O-shaped lawyer initiative that I'm involved in, and that's actually looking more at sort of mindset and sort of skills and behaviours of lawyers and law firms or the legal profession as a whole, and kind of not just the sort of diversity piece, but that kind of comes into it, because actually it's more about sort of mindset and the type of people that you want to work with. I think open-minded people are more likely to sort of embrace diversity, and diversity will, by virtue of that, be a natural sort of part of that sort of you know, institution or that sort of experience.
So on the O-shaped lawyer initiative, how is you know, what sort of work is that actually doing to make change happen in this sort of area? Not diversity specifically, but sort of a greater breadth of attributes in the lawyer.
Yeah, sure. So I think just for the people that might not be aware of it on the call, but definitely do a Google search, because we did launch the website earlier this week, finally. So it's the oshapedlawyer.com, or oshapedlawyer.com without the the. But essentially, this was an initiative that was founded by Dan Kane, who is the General Counsel of Networks at Network Rail. He was actually, him and I think one of his other kind of GCs was trying to do an exercise within their own legal team to kind of make their lawyers better, because I think, you know, what he was trying to do was sort of make sure that his lawyers understood that it's not just sort of the legal skills that he found important and that the company found important, but it's also behaviours as well, and sort of how those lawyers grow and kind of fulfil those more kind of rounded sort of mentalities. So we've kind of moved this through a number of different discussions and getting a group together of very like-minded GCs. We're trying to essentially, I guess, put the people at the heart of legal services. And we're trying to do that by driving, I guess, effectively what we can call positive change. So that's for people that are kind of working in it, those who are actually procuring services from it, and those who are actually entering the profession itself. So we've been, over the last sort of year or so, we've been engaging with general counsel, law firms and law schools to start looking at how we can embed these kind of O-shaped skills, mindsets and behaviours to make, I guess, legal practice a more human-centric, emotionally intelligent sort of ecosystem. And so we've been spreading it via word of mouth, via conferences, publications, LinkedIn. As I said, we've recently launched our website. But what that initiative is really trying to look at is these kind of, these type of behaviours that, you probably traditionally talk about sort of T-shaped lawyers or T-shaped people, but this is kind of trying to say, well, actually, it's that kind of open-mindedness, it's that creativity, it's all these kind of more sort of encompassing type behaviours you can definitely put into practice in law. And if we see more of it, maybe some of that hierarchy, maybe some of that sort of dichotomy of am I a lawyer, am I a business person, kind of starts to fall away, because we're not sort of putting people into these buckets. We're sort of saying, well, actually, you can be a technical lawyer and you can be technically brilliant. That's great. But, if you're not just a technical lawyer, you can be other things as well. And it'd be nice if the profession could embrace that myriad of different sort of behaviours and not pigeonhole people into certain areas that they shouldn't be in.
Mm. It has been put to me a couple of times that the experience of lockdown may have made for some slightly more human lawyers or human conversations around lawyers, around law between clients and law firms. I don't know if you've had any experience of that, or whether you could see it going that way. I think they're thinking of things like, you get to see where the person lives in halls like this. You potentially see more of their home life and all that sort of thing. Does that make us more human?
I think so. And I think there was already, it's not like this is something that hasn't been happening. I think it'd be nice that if this kind of really sparked a movement. So I definitely think that the sort of COVID crisis will kind of move us close to these goals of, being more inclusive, being, embracing diversity, being a bit more caring. I think some firms had already signed up to the sort of mental health charter, and so there already was this kind of cognizance of this being something we really need to kind of put more thought into. But I think through living and breathing it and seeing some of the daily challenges people are facing, I think it does force people, I guess, one of two ways. One is just to kind of, not go there, perhaps. But I think just caring about one another, asking how you are. It's funny because everybody goes, oh, hey, how you doing? You go, yeah, I'm fine, thanks. That interaction that used to be kind of the sort of bread and butter of, I guess, English worker kind of interaction. Actually, well, does that question now mean more than that? And actually, can you actually give a genuine response, which is, well, you know what, today I'm not feeling as great as I normally do. Is that now going to be something that doesn't make you that kind of oversharing weirdo, but actually means that you're genuinely connecting with each other? And then are people going to be more open with their kind of, sort of management structures? And so that you're going to need more compassionate leaders. And, we're going to need more of these sort of O-shaped qualities. And, you already see that that's where the world is going. You're already seeing that companies that have kind of sprung up in this crisis, that are trying to do things to save the economy, we're trying to do things to actually get, the sort of PCT sort of, masks and things to people, because they realise that making Gucci dresses isn't really the priority right now. I think, companies that are really trying to do the right thing resonates with humankind, and so you are going to get naturally more people whose value systems connect with that and want to be a part of it. And I think that hasn't always been the view of law firms. Perhaps lawyers originally were introduced as a concept to help people have access to representation, to make sure that somebody who's more articulate and well versed in a certain risk area are able to protect that person to the best of their ability. That's where we started. A lot of the kind of city is more about sort of protecting businesses and sort of, driving profits and that sort of thing. So, maybe we are getting a bit more of that sort of socially responsible lawyering. And I think, you see a lot of people who are volunteering even to help the NHS, people doing loads of pro bono work. The initiative I'm helping, I'm general counsel at the moment for a company called Heaven. I'm not getting paid for that, but I'm doing that because actually I think that's something that's, it's giving back, and we're all kind of going to hopefully get something out of it, whether it's experience or you're doing something that could make a difference. And I think if law firms, they do have to adapt, otherwise I think they will potentially get left further behind than some of the other sort of professions out there. But I think there has been a lot of positive work. in this space. I don't think we should forget that. But I think, now is the time to be demonstrating that, there's more that you can be doing, and that the firms that do that are going to naturally come out on top.
It is Mental Health Awareness Week, of course, and you did mention that you very much want to work with happy people, and you can tell if you're not. And you mentioned the Mindful Business Charter as well. Of course, some of that is all about law firms, the management and the policies of law firms changing there as well, isn't it? Not just individuals feeling that they can speak. It's also about things like how you resource work. I think you mentioned when we chatted before this about whether you're sending emails at every hour of the day or night, things like that. So do law firms need to sort of make sure that those things change as well?
I think law firms need to almost be less afraid to be honest.
Right.
And I think there's this kind of, this view that the customer or the client is always right. Well, we're not. We're humans too. They're humans, we're humans. And we don't always exhibit the right behaviours. So if you're one of those lawyers that sends out a piece of work to your law firm at 5 o'clock on a Friday, it's not cool. Equally, if your business is doing that to you in a company and doesn't necessarily need to do that, that's not cool of them either. So I think it's about trying to create working relationships that work. And so, sort of saying, this doesn't align with those things you've told me you want from us. If you're, doing these things regularly, or, one-offs happen, but if you're kind of not exhibiting those behaviours yourself, then you're not really helping the cause. So, I think law firms do need to be able to say no sometimes and feel that they should. And I think I've got respect for law firms that go, we're not the right price point for you for this type of work. Awesome, great. Now, what they usually say is that we'll still add you to our mailing list, we'll still keep in touch. And then they will, because they know that actually, if I ever get to a point where I need that sort of extra kind of, advice, expertise, whatever, they've shown that willing. We understand when it might be appropriate to engage in the future. So I think it's, as I said before, it's a relationship. Relationships you don't just neglect and expect them to be amazing a year or so down the line. They're things you've got to work at. But I think the people working at those relationships need to actually care about those things and need to be the right people to do that. Because I think a lot of what's driven the care has been, I guess, partners who are ultimately making a lot of money out of making sure those relationships work. Is that the right sort of approach? Is that the right driver? Should it be money driven, or should it actually be driven by, I'm the sort of person that I really like interacting with people. I really like sort of helping people. I really like providing solutions. So I actually think, and I think about this myself, if I ever went into progress, I'd love to manage those relationships, because I want to make them feel like I'm listening to them, providing solutions that suit them. That's my objective. But if it's money driven and it's status driven, maybe that's not the right way to go about it. And that's why perhaps some of the firms that are trying an alternative structure, where they've got the account managers, they've got the salespeople, and they're kind of taking away, there's always an element of incentivization, but they're kind of taking away the whole, I own this and I'm attached to this and I make money out of it in this particular way. Maybe you're going to break down some of those barriers. I think another thing that, always comes up in these conversations, but I still think it's worth talking about, is this billable hour concept. And if you're measuring lawyers on hours rather than output and quality of output, then they're always going to be driven, or they're going to be afraid to think differently, because if they don't meet that target, then they're not going to get remunerated for what they think they deserve. But actually, what about if they weren't working, they actually took 5 hours, something that normally takes 10. That's the sort of practice that I think and behaviour that should be incentivized in law firms, because it's showing innovation. It's showing that actually ways of doing things more intelligently and operationally efficient is something we value in a law firm. And right. That then should align with what I've got to do within my legal team, which is we're constantly being asked to do more with less. It's almost like we don't even want to hear that anymore, because it's just annoying. But effectively, I think any department in any company is being asked to do more with less, because that's how you leverage growth. Otherwise, it's the wrong equation. So you've got to be continuously thinking that growth mindset sort of way. How do I leverage hey, I'm a law firm, I've got this multitude of wealth of information and expertise. How do I leverage that so that it's so much easier to get to my clients, so that they actually do view us as the experts in this area and come to us for the right type of advice? They come to us for that expertise, or they come to us for the sweet spot that we say that we're in. Really think about that, rather than just wanting to road sweep whatever instructions come up because, hey, it hits that billable target.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna bring Gareth from Intapp back into the conversation now. While he's coming and joining, I just wondered, do you or would you get involved in sort of process improvement work in the law firm sort of collaboratively? Is that something that's been offered to you or something that you would be interested in? Sorry, Natalie. Have you had sort of collaborative workshops with law firms? It's part of the sort of the innovation work that they offer, I think, is sort of process law firm and client coming together to think about things around process improvement. Is that something that you've sort of been offered before? Natalie?
Sorry, I thought you were asking.
Sorry, no, yeah, I wasn't too. Yeah, sorry, that's you.
I was asking Natalie. But,
yeah.
Never mind. We'll move on. Gareth, obviously we covered a lot of ground there, but what stood out most for you in that conversation?
Ooh. Well, I've got about 50 points written down, so I don't think we've got enough time to go through all of them. But I mean, really, what you're saying is very refreshing, Natalie, in terms of the approach that you take and the approach that you're seeing a lot of your peers taking now to the way you select who you buy legal services off and how your law firms are engaging with you. I still think there's a fair amount of improvement to be done. But what I would be interested in is your thoughts around the sort of traditional bet the house type of legal work that corporates tend to go to the sort of top level, more expensive firms. Do you think now that there's a real emergence of the alternative structures winning this very, very top end work?
I think it depends on usually the kind of investment co's or VCs that are sitting at the top. So I still see, the whole, oh yeah, if we're going to do an M&A deal, we want the Freshfields in there, or we want the A&O, we want certain big powerhouses, because ultimately at that level and those players, and they're all, relatively high net worth individuals, private equity, it's all a very small world. Usually their mates are partners there. It kind of is a very closed kind of environment. I think so. If you've got that kind of behaviour being led from that top co-level, you do see a lot of that. Well, we need to have the right names in the room, right? And having worked for a lot of US companies, I do see that as an approach that's kind of taken. It's like, we're happy to use these firms, but when it comes to those big ticket deals, we need the big name on there. I'm much more open-minded about that, and I haven't always had an opportunity to influence at that level of sort of engagement. But I do think there is definitely a space for that. And there's actually a company I'm speaking to at the moment, and they're actually looking at how they can work with clients. And it's usually on the sort of smaller kind of startup sort of side, small business kind of owners who are actually being acquired or who are looking to enter into an M&A process. Yeah. And, the woman that I've been speaking to has come up with a really cool way of methodology of how you almost commoditize the M&A sort of processes to, the different types of documentation, the processes that there are, and try and do it in a more cost-effective kind of way. Because actually, a lot of the time, a lot of it's quite repetitive type work. Yes, there are nuances. Every business is different. Due diligence is going to be one thing. But if you put the onus on the client to really understand the business they're acquiring, which actually should be what you're doing, because they're the people who are going to be running the business afterwards and involved in it afterwards, there is a smarter way of doing things. So I think the beauty is that those models are emerging. And I think the more that people start to take a punt on these different type of models, the more they realise that actually they do work, and actually they can save a lot of money, and they can actually have a bit more fun in the process because they feel like they're doing something that is more streamlined, isn't costing their company an arm and a leg, and actually is probably something that they can ultimately, if you're in-house, probably even replicate yourself, because there is a certain kind of version of that you can do probably without being a really sort of big wig technical M&A lawyer. So I think definitely there's a lot happening in that space.
Thank you. And another point I wanted to ask. So you talked a lot about when it was back in the BLP days with virtual portals and the ability to share documents and see where the transaction is in the process. What do you think is going to be the next sort of BLP type of innovation then moving forward? So
there are a few companies out there that are trying to achieve this at the moment, but effectively what is an annoyance for the in-house sort of profession is that they need to make sure when they're kind of procuring a piece of tech that it can fit into an ecosystem that's kind of more like Lego. Mm-hmm. And that you've already got a bit of Lego in there that's the business kind of stuff. You've got your finance tools and you want to add and plug your legal tools in. Don't want people having in the business to leave an environment that they're used to operating in, whether it's Salesforce or whether it's, you know, some sort of ERP solution, and then have to then plug into a law firm piece of software, sorry, a legal tool where they've got another login, or you can have single sign-on, but they have to go into another environment and feel like they're kind of being pushed into what effectively they view then as the legal functions role, because it looks like it's a legal tool still. So I think any companies that are coming up with ways to homogenize the ways that you can plug this way in, so getting intelligent with APIs and are creating a hub that can plug in and do a lot of different things, that's one platform that we don't need to worry that's going to have an end of shelf life, or if it gets acquired by a third party, oh, actually you're not allowed to interact with these different players because, you know, they're competitors of ours. We don't want that headache. We want to know that the tech that's being invested in and that's out there on the market is something that's going to be easy to switch on and off, and then actually will make sense to stay with in the long term, because we don't have an end of shelf life. And that's been one of the biggest barriers to a lot of tech innovation in-house. And you see it even with all the stories that you get there in the legal press, that, you know, some of these really big companies and the really cool stuff with certain platforms, but they'll say, oh, we did this with our property law contracts, or we did this with these type of contracts. But it's not a proper ecosystem.
Yeah.
So I think the more we get towards that ecosystem, the more it will be a complete no-brainer and a level playing field for people in-house to go, well, actually, I'm happy to take that punt, because I know that, you know, I'm not going to then have to extract all my data out of that, or I'm going to be left with a storage issue, or, you know, there's going to be sort of, you know, I'm going to have to go through that whole IT change process again in a couple of years' time. And I think that's why you don't see as many sort of companies, you know, legal functions taking that chance.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Gareth, a big theme that came out for me was client listening. And had a perspective on, you know, what law firms might need from a data perspective to enable them to listen to their clients better, you know, to have those.
Absolutely. I think sort of one of the biggest sort of challenges we're trying to solve at Intapp is really around data, and it's the accessibility of data, whether it's bringing together internal silos with external information, whether it's delivering it to lawyers in a mobile capacity or through a web client or through Outlook integration, however they want to consume it. But I think on the client listening front, traditionally law firms will have interviews with clients. They will take the feedback the clients give them, that will live in a Word document, that will go and live within a document management system, that may occasionally get taken out around review time, or if they're doing some sort of preparation for a panel interview, something like that. But ultimately, unless you make that sort of information central, shareable, trackable, where people are accountable, what you'll find is that negative client listening tends not to be shared, and positive client listening tends to be shared. Whereas actually, of course, it's the things that you're not doing well that you need to, that your clients are saying to you, basically, you know, we will probably spend less with you or more with you if you act upon this feedback that they're giving you, because that's ultimately what the clients are telling them. And some firms are very good at managing that information centrally, and some still leave it in various silos where they're not able to act upon it.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like very much a behavioural thing and the technology.
It's absolutely, yeah. The technology is there, absolutely, but the firms need to want to act upon the feedback that they get from their clients. And I mean, Natalie mentioned a few times the word honesty in the last 45 minutes. And I think firms they need to accept, first of all, that they're not doing a great job of everything all the time. And once they've accepted that, then it's much easier to then work out how they can improve. And as you've heard today from Natalie, the clients are happy to give them the feedback, and they want them to improve.
But equally, that needs to be a two-way stream, and there needs to be that kind of breaking down of boundaries. And, you know, with a lot of service provisions out there, if you buy, you know, a meal off Deliveroo, you will get a customer satisfaction survey or a how did we do question straight away. You know, why aren't we giving that ability? Why aren't we gamifying what we're doing? And, you know, I think a lot of people find it gimmicky, but if you value real-time data, then you should value real-time feedback. Now, we don't always have the time or desire to give that feedback, but, you know, usually if we've had a really positive experience, we want to share it. And usually if we've had a really bad experience, we want to share it. So actually, if you're not getting the kind of middle ground, you don't probably need to get, you know, feedback on the middle ground, both sides. But if you're getting that exceptional and bad, why not put yourself out there to make sure you're capturing that? Because, as you said, the success stories make everybody feel good. The really bad are what you want to avoid. So why would you not want to get that data so that you can prevent that happening in the future?
So from your perspective then, Natalie, as a buyer of legal services, then what would be the ideal sort of review? Would it be post-matter that you'd sit down and go through with the firm how they've done? Would it be an annual review, a 6-monthly? What would your advice be?
I think it's a blend of all, really. And I think, it's like if you're a commercial lawyer and you are dealing with procurement contracts or service rated contracts, that's built into them. That's built into them with all the services that you procure from third parties as a business. But with law firms, we don't do that. So I think for me, I think that real-time ability, I think, and not getting upset if people don't do it, because it's not for everyone. Some people aren't comfortable with this kind of, in real dialogue. Actually, a lot of the younger generations are more used to real-time feedback and more comfortable with it. So we'll probably see more prevalence of that. But I think those quarterly business reviews, you get those with key strategic partnerships. This is a key strategic partnership for the legal function. So what you should be doing that. And then that annual piece too. And then having some data and metrics. The amount of reviews I've had where I sit down with a law firm, they don't have any data. They just go, how do you think it's been? Oh, we build this for you. Yeah, that's nice. I know, because I've been paying your bills. And I know how the relationship generally has gone because I'm still here. It's okay. But, where is that kind of insight? And I think if you are proactive with that, I think one of the things is, some of us are proactive GCs. Some of us don't have the time to, even if we are proactive GCs, engage in this way, but we want to, and there is a desire to. So the more you can take the pain out of that feedback process, the more feedback you'll get. But I think there's also this fear of feedback, because I think as lawyers, we're perfectionists. We don't like being told we've done a bad job, because all we care about is doing the right thing and trying to be really good and clever and be the best that we can be. So we don't take feedback very well, but we've got to get comfortable with that kind of O-shaped mentality of being open to feedback and criticism and having the resilience to take it on and implement something that achieves an objective. And if we can get into those behavioural traits, naturally the profession is going to improve and these relationships are going to improve.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. We're almost out of time now. Thanks so much, Natalie and Gareth. Perhaps we should do this again in a year's time and see whether new normal has led to new listening or new relationships. Thank you.
We could maybe do it in person, Richard, in a year's time as well.
That would be nice. That would be nice. Thanks very much, both of you, and thank you all for listening to us today as well. Thank you for your questions. We'll be running some more sessions like this at Briefing over the coming month. And if you aren't as familiar with Briefing as you should be, you can find us on Twitter at Briefing Legal, and also all of our back issues online at briefing.co.uk. Thank you very much, everyone, again.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.